The last bench in the park. Imagine you're alone, sitting every day on the same park bench, waiting for something you don't even know what it is, until a child appears and gives you life with just a smile. But that child is not what he seems. This isn't just another story. It's a divine appointment, a miracle disguised in innocence. And yes, we warn you of something, you're going to cry. Stay until the end and discover how God touched the life of an elderly man, using the pure soul of a child from heaven. They say that loneliness hurts more in the heart than in the bones. But they also say that when you think everything is lost, God always sends a light. This is the story of Don Ernesto. Don Ernesto was 82 years old. Every morning, he would slowly walk to the town's central park, where he always sat on the same bench, right under an old jacaranda tree. He had a lost gaze, clean but worn clothes, and a small notebook in his hands where he wrote things no one could understand. He didn't speak much with anyone. Children ran around him. Adults passed by without greeting him, and he just stared at the sky as if waiting for an answer. No one knew that within his soul lived an immense emptiness. He had lost his wife 3 years ago, and his only son much earlier in a car accident. Since then, the only company he had was God and his bench. But one day, everything changed. A child sat beside him. "Why are you always alone, sir?" asked the little one with curious and sincere eyes. Don Ernesto took a while to respond. He pressed the notebook against his chest and answered with a trembling voice, "I'm not alone, son. I'm just waiting for someone to hear my prayer." The child fell silent. His small eyes looked at him with a mixture of sadness and tenderness. He was about 8 years old, wearing simple clothes and holding an ice cream that was starting to melt. "And what are you asking for in your prayer?" he insisted innocently. Don Ernesto smiled weakly and opened his notebook. The pages were filled with phrases, verses, and small drawings. But on the first page, written with a firm hand, was a sentence that read, "Lord, I don't ask for years, just one more day to feel loved." The child read in silence, and his gaze changed. He sat closer to Ernesto, broke his ice cream in half, and offered him the other half. "My mom says that when you share, God smiles," he said as he extended his hand. Ernesto accepted it not so much for the ice cream but for the gesture. He felt a warmth in his chest, a flame he hadn't felt in years. "What's your name, son?" "Matthias," he replied with a smile. "And you?" "Ernesto, though it's been a long time since anyone called me by my name." The two sat quietly, eating ice cream, watching the leaves fall. And for the first time in a long time, Ernesto didn't feel invisible. But what he didn't know was that Matthias wasn't just any child. The next day, Ernesto returned to his bench. This time, he arrived earlier, with his notebook carefully tucked inside his coat, and a faint hope fluttering in his chest. He didn't know why, but something told him that Matthias would return. And he was right. "Don Ernesto!" the child shouted from the entrance of the park, waving his hand with enthusiasm. The old man smiled like he hadn't in years. Matthias sat beside him, this time with a small bag of bread. "I brought food for the pigeons. Do you like watching them eat?" "I like seeing how something so simple makes them happy," Ernesto replied. "Sometimes, people forget that happiness lives in the small things." For hours they talked. Matthias asked endless questions about life, dreams, love, and also about God. Don Ernesto responded with the wisdom that only years and pain can bring. But something caught his attention. Matthias never mentioned his family. He never talked about his home or his school. And there was a strange calmness in his eyes, as if he had spent centuries understanding things that other children did not. "Matthias, do you believe in angels?" Ernesto asked in a whisper. The child lowered his gaze, smiled, and replied, "I believe that God sends people into our lives right when we need them the most. Don't you think that's already a miracle?" And then, something inside Ernesto broke. Not from sadness, but from something much deeper, healing. That afternoon, Ernesto didn't want to leave the park. Matias stayed by his side until the sun began to hide behind the trees, painting the sky orange and gold. The old man had tears in his eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time in years, someone had listened to him, looked him in the eye, and shared with him without expecting anything in return. "Thank you for coming, Matias," he said, his voice trembling. "Thank you, Don Ernesto. I needed you too." The child said goodbye with a strong hug, the kind that shakes the soul. And then, before walking away, Matias turned around and said something that would leave the old man completely silent. "God heard your prayer. He didn't give you more years. He gave you something better, a reason to smile." And he left. Ernesto watched him walk away between the trees, his heart beating loudly. He wanted to follow him, but when he turned the corner of the park, the child was no longer there. There was no one, no trace, not even the small footprints of his shoes. The old man stood still, not fully understanding what had happened. And then he knew. Matias was not an ordinary child. Matias was an answer from heaven. That night, Don Ernesto didn't sleep as he usually did. He didn't toss and turn in loneliness, nor did he speak out loud to his notebook. Instead, he lit a candle and knelt beside his bed, something he hadn't done since his wife passed away. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered with his eyes closed. "I don't understand why you sent that child to me, but thank you, because I felt alive again." The next day, he returned to the park, and the day after that, he waited for Matias for hours on the same bench under the same tree. But the child didn't return. Days passed, and days, and although at first the absence hurt, Ernesto didn't stop going. Because even though Matias didn't appear, he had left something in his heart that could never be erased. Hope. One morning, while feeding the pigeons, a woman approached. She was holding a notebook in her hand and had a curious expression on her face. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Don Ernesto?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do we know each other?" The woman smiled sadly and showed him the notebook. "My son." His name was Matias. He had this notebook in his backpack when he passed away 2 years ago. Ernesto froze. "How do you say?" The woman opened the notebook, and there on the first page was a drawing. A park bench, a jacaranda tree, and an old man with a notebook in his hand. Don Ernesto trembled. He looked at the drawing and couldn't understand. It was him without a doubt. The bench, the tree, even his gray coat. Everything was there, perfectly drawn with childish hands. "Did you say your son's name was Matias?" he managed to ask, his voice trembling. "Yes, he was only 8 years old. He was a special child, a very spiritual. He always said he wanted to help sad people. One day, he wrote in his journal that when he went to heaven, he would ask God to let him return to comfort the hearts that had forgotten how to smile." Ernesto's eyes filled with tears. His soul trembled, as if everything he had experienced in those days was being rearranged within him. Where did he pass away?" he barely asked. "In this park," the woman replied, her voice shaking. "He was hit right there, crossing to the kiosk. He was bringing a drawing to an elderly man who, according to him, sat every day waiting for God." Ernesto covered his mouth. He felt as if his heart was breaking and being rebuilt at the same time. The child who had given him hope, the child who broke his ice cream, who spoke to him about faith, the child who seemed sent from heaven. It was Matthias, and now in front of him was his mother, another broken soul who needed to hear the same truth he had just understood. Don Ernesto took the notebook from the mother's hands. He held it as if it were sacred. They both sat on the bench in silence, listening to the bird songs, the rustling of leaves, and the murmur of God between the trees. "Ma'am," he finally said, "your son didn't just return. He fulfilled his promise. He gave me back my life." The woman cried silently. She clutched a wooden cross hanging from her neck between her fingers. "I thought God had taken everything from me, but today, I feel like he's returned it to me in a different way." Ernesto nodded. "Sometimes miracles don't come as we expect. They come as we need them." From that day on, both of their lives changed. Every afternoon, Ernesto and Matthias' mother met on that same bench. They shared stories, prayed, and in every word, they remembered the child who united two broken souls with one single mission: to make God's love not go unnoticed. And although Matthias never appeared again in body, Ernesto felt him in every gentle breeze, in every falling leaf, in every smile that appeared for no apparent reason. Because when an angel passes through your life, you never forget them. Years passed. The bench under the jacaranda tree remained in its place. Some saw it as just any spot, but for those who knew the story, that bench was sacred. Don Ernesto passed away peacefully on a quiet night, with his notebook in his hands and a serene smile. When they found him, he was sitting on his bench, as he did every day, with his head tilted toward the sky, and in his lap, a leaf written with trembling handwriting that read, "Thank you, Lord. You gave me an angel disguised as a child, and reminded me that even in the sunset, there are dawns that bloom." A crowd didn't attend his funeral, but she did Matthias' mother. She brought purple flowers, like those of the jacaranda, and a lit candle. Years later, a small plaque was placed on the bench. It read, "Here, two broken souls sat, and God embraced them with a miracle. And if you ever pass by that park, sit down, close your eyes. Perhaps you'll hear a child's voice telling you, God listened to you too." Maybe you're also waiting for a sign, a miracle, or simply for someone to look you in the eyes and say, "You're not alone. This story is for you." Because when everything seems lost, God appears, sometimes as a child, sometimes as a breeze, but always with love.